Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Michael Caplan. His last name is spelled Caplan. And he's just finished an excellent documentary, which I watched yesterday. The title of the documentary is Algren, the movie, and it will be out in 2 days, October 1st, 2021. People go check that out. But Mr. Caplan is an independent film director, producer, and teacher. The film before this was titled A Magical Vision, which is a feature-length documentary that spotlights Eugene Berger, a magician and guru of the magical arts, and it has been shown in festivals from Chicago to India and won an audience award at the Spirit Enlightened Film Festival. He's also directed Stones from the Soil, a documentary about his father that showed on National PBS in 2005. He's an associate professor in the Cinema, Art, and Science Department at Columbia College in Chicago. And this movie, the background really is Chicago. It's almost part of the story is this interesting part of the city that Algren wrote about and lived in. But director Michael Caplan can talk more about that. So, Michael Caplan, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good
Awesome.
to talk to you, William.
Good, great to have you. I'm delighted that you agreed to the interview. Really an interesting topic. Can you talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in the subject of Algren and what led you to start the production on this documentary?
Well, I've been making films and videos for probably about 25 years now. And over the last 20 years, I really focused on documentaries. And you mentioned two of my previous documentaries. And I was really in the midst of finishing up my previous documentary about Eugene Berger, the magician, when I met the photographer Art Shea at a gallery opening in Chicago. And Art at that time was a young, spry 87 years old. And Art was a real trip. He was a real character, originally from Brooklyn, and a little short fireplug of a guy who had traveled all over the world, taking pictures of everybody from presidents to movie stars. But what I knew him as was the photographer of Nelson Algren. Growing up in Chicago, Nelson Algren was just someone that you knew about, who wrote about the people at the bottom of the social spectrum. And if you had seen a photograph of Algren, you had seen Art Shea's work, because he was pretty much the dominant photographer of Algren. And so when I met him, I just said, well, Mr. Shea, I've always loved your work about Nelson Algren. And he said, what do you do? I told him, and he said, well, you should do a documentary about Nelson Algren. And I was kind of shocked that no one had at that point. And something I always tell my students is be careful what you say yes to, because I said yes. And then, many years later, we finally ended up with this documentary about Nelson Algren.
And for people who may not know, can you just give a brief background of Nelson Algren and kind of what led him to writing and kind of what he wrote about?
Well, Nelson Algren was born in Detroit, but grew up in Chicago. His family moved when he was at a pretty young age. And he grew up, something also I did not know, about 2 blocks away from where I live on the northwest side of Chicago. And his father was working class. He was a car mechanic. And Algren grew up thinking that he would be a journalist. That's what he wanted to do. So he went to the University of Illinois in Chicago, and he was in the midst of getting his degree to be a journalist when the Depression hit. And that really, for him and for a lot of people, just changed everything about his life. He ended up going on the road, taking, kind of bumming around the country, ended up in Texas, ended up getting arrested for stealing a typewriter while he was in Texas. And when he came back to Chicago, he had already started writing. And simultaneously, the WPA had been formed. And one of the programs they had was it basically supported writers and other artists to communicate what was going on around the country to the rest of the country. There's actually a really great book that just came out about that program because it really changed the lives of so many people. People like Richard Wright and Studs Terkel, and Algren was one of those people. And so it was at that point in the late 30s, early 40s that he started writing about the people who society had left behind, the people who were the addicts, the drunks, the sex workers, the people that, you know, didn't really get a second look from society. So that was really what put him into that path of writing about that part of society.
Right. So he kind of saw the other side that maybe not as many people thought were as glamorous, but he seemed to really mix with those people as well. Would you agree with that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. He lived in the neighborhood, Wicker Park, which is now a totally kind of gentrified, very nice area. But at the time, it was kind of a slum. And he lived there in a little one-room apartment. He had to go to the YMCA to take a shower. You know, I mean, he was living really small. And the people he wrote about were the people on his street. So he was really, he had a commitment to that telling those stories and telling them from close up, not just from afar.
And he was kind of that sensibility. He got pinched for stealing a typewriter in Texas. He was interested in selling stuff on the black market while he was in the war, World War II. So he kind of seemed a little scrappy, like he was one of those people, you know, just trying to get by, the people that he wrote about, really. Can you talk about how he kind of made it in the literary world, what his book was, and how he kind of made his mark?
Well, he had written several books. He had written a novel, Someone in Boots, which he later just kind of left off his list. He kind of disavowed it. But then he went on to really, the first novel of note was called Never Come Morning, and it was in the early 40s, and it was really set during in that world that I've been talking about, the world around him and of the people who were the dispossessed. After that, he wrote a collection of short stories called The Neon Wilderness, which just its name, you know, kind of tells you so much about what the big cities were becoming in the U.S. after World War II. This place, you know, of kind of glitz and glamour, but, you know, also a place where there were lots of people who were not getting the benefit of what was starting to happen in the U.S. And it was really, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, he was very sensitive to kind of the class situation where there was definitely an dispossessed, yes, people who were definitely, he says, I think the back of the billboard, the people who live behind the billboard.
Right. Correct. And it was after that he wrote what most people consider his magnus opus, which was Man with the Golden Arm, which later got made into a movie with Frank Sinatra. And A Man with the Golden Arm was, you know, a sprawling 500-600 page novel that really dug into this one character, Frankie Machine, who had come out of World War II and was a morphine addict. He was also a drummer, a jazz drummer, and he was also a dealer of cards. He was a poker dealer. And so the idea of the Man with the Golden Arm had a kind of a two-sided meaning, because it was about someone who was an addict, but also someone who played poker. And that really catapulted him into the mainstream. The book won the first National Book Award, which was in 1950. Eleanor Roosevelt awarded it to him. And he was all of a sudden he had something close to a bestseller, and that really made him, for a while, not for as long as you might think, made him kind of a household name, someone that people knew and would read in book clubs, and was someone that was discussed, in the press.
And he was also kind of suppressed. Some people thought he was a little bit too over the edge, right? Like I think there was something the Polish Roman Catholic Legion complained about his writing, things like that. And he wrote about Polish people, which I think is interesting too.
I mean, a lot of the neighborhood that he lived in was Polish immigrants, and the Roman Catholic Church, the Polish Catholic, I forgot, community. They wrote up against him. There were a lot of pushback later on when he wrote Chicago City on the Make, which was kind of this love and hate letter to Chicago. He got lots of pushback from the tourist industry. People felt like he made Chicago look like not a really nice place. And so he definitely was always kind of fighting, the power. And then later on, and it's not in the movie, but the FBI actually kept a file on him and made it difficult for him to travel for a while because he could not get a passport. So he ran into a lot of roadblocks.
Right. And so he had this kind of underground thing, but he also, because he came from there, there's a couple people who remarked in your film that his ear for their cadence of their talk and the way that the locals in Chicago talked, like he had it down, like that was part of his realism or his authenticity, right?
Right. It was very much, he wrote from the conversations that he had with the people in the bars on the street. These were firsthand accounts. In many ways, it was kind of a predecessor to, the modern journalism, the new journalism that came out in the 60s with Hunter Thompson and Tom Wolfe, where he was in the story. He wasn't a character in the story, but he was in the story in that this was something that he wrote from hundreds of hours of being in this community and talking to people and getting the stories. So when he wrote about the people, he was not a tourist, as we say, coming in and just kind of spending a couple weeks and, getting all this research and then going home. This was his life, 24 hours a day, 365 days a week,
Right. And he lived that. I think one of the persons in your film quoted, he wasn't a voyeur. He was among his people, horse betting, gambling, drinking, kind of living kind of a beat writers type of life in Chicago. And it is interesting in the film, you have all these people from Chicago commenting on Algren and, what a cultural influence he was. So you have Billy Corrigan, William Friedkin, the director of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I can't remember his name right now, but like really interesting characters who talked about him from their perspective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, he definitely was part of that, community. Philip Kaufman, as the director you're thinking of. Yeah, I mean, I ran into people who knew him when they were young, like Friedkin and Kaufman, actually, knew him and spent time with him and did things with him when they were young, growing up in Chicago in the 60s. But, the people who knew him knew about his commitment. And yes, he also liked to have a good time. He wasn't like the kind of prototypical beat writer in that he didn't feel like he had to become a drug user, in order to write about addicts. But he certainly, he lived that life of playing poker and hanging in the bars. And, he liked to box and he liked to go see boxing matches. He would go to the horse, to the racing track. He definitely, he knew how to have a good time. That was for sure. But it wasn't about, just getting wasted, like, Hunter Thompson, where he would feel like he'd have to take 20 drugs before he could write about anything. Algren he was a mix of a journalist and a fiction writer, because he would take the journalistic research and then write fiction about it.
Right. And you do mention like Hunter S. Thompson quoted from A Walk on the Wild Side, really complimented Algren. I thought that was a really interesting segment you had. But also he kind of mixed with some high-end literary figures. Can you talk about his relationship to Simone de Beauvoir? So, I mean, really notable
yeah. Well, he could also mingle with the glitterati. He could go to Lakeshore Drive and hang out with the rich people who loved to hear this esteemed man who had won these awards. And it was through knowing some of those people that Simone de Beauvoir was told by a friend of hers to call up Nelson Algren when she came to Chicago. And she did, and they immediately became lovers and had this extended 5-6 year long love affair, which really lasted for the rest of Algren's life. But the most intimate part, the most intense part, was those 5-6 years. And yes, when he got to go to Paris, he hung out with all of the literati in the left bank, and he could do that, but that was not where he wanted to be. He wanted to go and hang out and have a few drinks, and then he wanted to go back to where he was living, and it's just kind of little flat with his books stacked up and newspapers and stuff on the walls, and just really it was not what he was yearning for. He was not going back to the suburbs or going back to Hyde Park and just living the middle class lifestyle. He lived the life that he wrote about.
Right. So he didn't seem to be really attracted to that kind of cultural elite of Beauvoir and Sartre and all these other characters. But it was interesting that he thought that, I think you stated in the book, she was his intellectual equal. So somebody externally you would see walking down the street didn't look like maybe a college professor, but obviously super intelligent guy and really kind of a character. And he was really a dedicated writer. I mean, my impression was he was a very dedicated writer who didn't maintain he had been in and out of relationships frequently and kind of bounced around. Did you think that his writing career prevented him from having long-term relationships?
Well, he's got a really famous quote, which is, if you want to be a successful writer, be a bachelor. He really felt like he didn't want something that would weigh him down. So he got married, then got divorced, then married the same woman again later on and divorced, then married someone else and divorced. He was never married for more than about 2 years. Ironically, it was really de Beauvoir, which was to him his one true love, and he would have married her. I don't know if it would have worked. I don't think it would have, but he was not someone who wanted to get weighed down, except for de Beauvoir, and that was one of the great kind of sadnesses for him, is that they could never reconcile their different lifestyles.
And she was kind of like it seemed like it was a love triangle too. There was other things involved pulling her away. But that wasn't his only disappointment. He had kind of had some success in Hollywood, at least with his writing. But can you explain what his impressions were with how his works were made into films?
Well, it's an old story, that the writers almost never like the books that get made from their work. And he was a stubborn guy, so when he went out to work with Otto Preminger on Man with the Golden Arm, they came to blows very quickly, and he left after about a week and a half, because they could just not work together. And he got paid, what by today, the equivalent was, not a terrible amount of money, but given, what could have happened if he had really had a good negotiator, a good agent, he kind of got screwed. And that happened also with his the second book that got made into a film, Walk on the Wild Side. So he he wanted to be known. He liked being known as a writer, but also there was a part of him that resisted it. He didn't want the glamour, because he was really worried that he would lose his connection to the subject matter that he wanted to write about. Russell Banks has this great quote. The amazing novelist Russell Banks knew Algren when he was very young, and Russell Banks said, we all worship that bitch goddess fame, but then we also kind of push her away. And Algren was really kind of the embodiment of that, that he didn't want to, just have nonstop parties and, literary events. He wanted to be able to return back to the source.
Right. And also interesting aspect of his character is he didn't seem to take himself too seriously. Like maybe an author thinks of himself as very profound, but he seems to really have kind of a funny aspect to him. And everybody, like people mentioned in the movie, this is like one of the funniest people they've ever met. Yeah,
he definitely could. He was not afraid to be a clown. Any nice clothes that he got, he had gotten from Goodwill. He was a guy. He would wear a rope for a belt. To a really nice kind of shishi event, just because it was kind of his way of sticking his thumb in the eyes of the people who were a little bit more elite. He did not want to, embrace that life, and he kind of, stayed away from it. And now I've forgotten the question that you asked.
Oh, I was just saying that it was just for somebody who was saw himself as a writer.
Oh, right.
One aspect of his character was that he was kind of like I think you said he went to improvs and joked around.
Yeah, absolutely. He would hang out he'd go to Second City and hang out there. He was a kind of a goof, and his writing could be comic too. It was really serious, but something like Walk on the Wild Side is kind of there's kind of a goofy protagonist who doesn't, really get what it is that he doesn't get. He's kind of oblivious. He thinks that he's someone who's really kind of on top of everything, but doesn't understand that he really has no clue what's going on. So he could write comedy. Something he wrote a lot more into the 60s were more kind of comic little pieces. And as just a person to hang out with, he could definitely just be very, very funny. So it was not about just, I'm doing this is serious, and, don't interrupt my serious work. He recognized that you had to be able to laugh sometimes, even at yourself.
And he kind of, some of his, you say in the film that some of his films, books became sold as Pulp Fiction. Where do you think Algren's work deserves to be sitting in kind of current literary perspective?
Oh, it's got to be the reason we made this and spend so much time on it is because it should be part of, just the American, the standard of American literature. It should be, taught in any kind of a survey course of American literature. His work really embodied what America was like in the mid 20th century. And his work is admired and respected by so many people, other writers, other artists, who understood that not just what he wrote about, but the way he wrote about it. He had a style that was unique, that was something that he worked hard on. And he was a craftsman. He cared about the way in which he wrote. And so, people like Hemingway said he was second only to Faulkner, William Faulkner, as an American writer. And so he should just be part of the canon of American writing.
And one of the things that he didn't have that many writers do is this skill of self-promotion, whether they wear fancy clothes or they are going on circuits or hobnobbing with people. He seemed to be the opposite. Can you talk about how that sensibility affected his appreciation of his work?
Well, it was a problem, he wasn't in the internet age, but the reality is, it's always been about promotion, I mean, from F. Scott Fitzgerald, to Hemingway. These were people that got known because of kind of their persona. And even, amongst Algren's contemporaries, people like Norman Mailer and Saul Bellow, had a way of kind of presenting themselves in a way that felt comfortable to the people who, wanted to celebrate them. And he just thought, that was not part of his job. He felt like his job was to write. He didn't feel like his job was to promote himself. He'd go on TV, he'd go on a radio show, and talk about his work if he was invited, but he was not out there kind of hobnobbing in order to maximize his visibility.
Right.
He just felt like the work should speak for itself. And that's a problem. It's a problem today. We see that in, the internet age, that if you're not out there, doing the social media thing, then it can hurt you because people may not find you.
Absolutely. I mean, I can speak to that from experience. It's so important. And now some of these other writers doing that, their almost skill was in self-promotion than actually writing, But you see how personas help all of these authors sell books. Hunter S. Thompson, Tough Guy, Hell's Angels, all that stuff.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, yeah, he was certainly great at that. Thompson, he put himself out there as like the crazy guy who would do anything. Absolutely.
Right. And so when you went about kind of compiling, I mean, the pictures are fantastic. There's all kinds of pictures of him with Studs Terkel, all these other characters from Chicago. What was it like kind of, did you get a lot of assistance from Shea, or how did you find all of the footage and photography? Do you mind talking about that?
No, not at all. So like I said, what started this whole process was meeting Art Shea, and I knew that if I couldn't get access to his work, that there would be no way to make a good Nelson Algren movie. And a huge portion of the still black and white photos that we include in the movie are Art Shea's work, not just of Algren, but of what life in the street and in the poorer areas of the city were like. We did find a huge amount of other photos and some video as well, mostly through the Algren archive, which we spent many, many days, long days, going through, finding lots of letters back and forth between different people, and Algren writing to people and them writing back. I wish, if there's something I would, have loved to have had different about the movie, it would have been more film footage. That's the one thing we could not find a lot of, but we did find some nice footage of him. And that was really where most of it came from, was from our time at the Algren archive.
Gotcha. And just one last question. I mean, what do you think Algren's perception of himself after he had written his 11 books, many articles, The Atlantic? How do you think that? I mean, I got a sense that he might have left Chicago and moved east out of kind of a bitterness or emptiness for not being appreciated. Would you agree with that?
He became very bitter near the end of his life, and it's really unfortunate. He felt like he was no longer appreciated in Chicago, and he took this opportunity to go out east and write about the Hurricane Carter murder case, and kind of settled ultimately in Sag Harbor on Long Island, and kind of at that point was embraced, late to the party, mind you, but he was embraced by the literary elite out east. People like Kurt Vonnegut, Salman Rushdie, all became really supportive and fans of Algren. But yeah, he really felt like ultimately he was no longer appreciated in his own city. That people had gone on to people like Saul Bellow, who wrote about the middle class, and that Algren's perspective was not welcome. And so yeah, he kind of said, screw all this, I'm moving on.
Right, and Sag Harbor was kind of like a literary enclave, right? There were other writers around there.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. There were a ton of people out there like Vonnegut, and he had several years of just living, on the ocean and feeling like, the life has worked out pretty well for me, So it kind of, had somewhat of a happy ending, in that he was appreciated near the end of his life. And just before the end of his life, he had gotten what had always been denied to him, which was membership in the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and which was kind of the embodiment of, being accepted by the mainstream literary community. And then he, had a heart attack and died before he could even, go to the occasion to get to be celebrated and be feted. So it was kind of this bittersweet ending to his life.
Yeah, almost as like he lived kind of a life like the characters he wrote about, in a way. Like that was a reflection of him and the way his life kind of worked out. This movie comes out in 2 days. Where's the best place for people to watch it? Algren, the movie.
We are getting a small theatrical run. It's going to be opening in Los Angeles on October 1st, playing at multiple Laemmle theaters. And if you're not in LA, so first, if you are in LA, please come out, support independent documentary work. It would be great. I'm going to be out there on Saturday night, October 2nd, to introduce it and do a Q&A. But if you're not in LA or can't get to the movies in the theater, it's going to be available streaming through several Chicago-based theaters like the Gene Siskel Film Theater and the Music Box Theater, and they'll have it available streaming kind of in the what we call the virtual theatrical mode. And then next year, the goal is to get it out onto one of the streamers like a Netflix or a Hulu, depending on how things go. But right now, so starting October 15th, it'll be available through those two theaters, the Gene Siskel Theater and the Music Box Theater.
Great. So then supporting independent media is so important too. You encourages the furtherance of the creation of films like this. So you get
yeah.
And so the website that I'm showing on YouTube for people who aren't watching YouTube is Algren the Movie, all one word.com, algrenthemovie.com. And is that website the best place to contact you if people want to reach out to you, Michael Caplan?
Absolutely. And then you can also see we've got the usual, social media, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And those are all available, through algrenthemovie.com. And that would be the best way to contact us. You can send us an email. And we'd love to hear about it because, we are kind of dedicated to spreading the word of Nelson Algren.
Great. And is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up or before I wrap it up?
Well, I think one of the things that is so striking to me about, the life we live today in the United States is the names and the places and maybe the ethnic groups have changed, but the reality is the world that Algren wrote about back in the 40s and 50s is still here in America. And we're hoping that this wakes people up, the people who may want to address those stories, because there are still those stories to tell, and those are really important to tell those stories about the people who are living on the wrong side of the billboard, as Algren said, who don't have a Chevy in their garage, and 2 kids and a white picket fence. Lots of people who are still waiting for the American dream to happen. And that's something that we hope Algren inspires people to do, is to investigate and take a look at the America that is still not a place for, that has not gotten everybody on board.
Right. That's so true. Again, the title of the documentary is Algren the Movie, and the guest today is the director, Michael Caplan, Caplan. And again, the website is algrenthemovie.com, so you can go check it out there. And its release is October 2nd or October 1st in LA. Then out of 2 spots, I'll try to put these in the show notes, the 2 spots in the Chicago Siskel Theater. And then good luck with just further distribution of your film, Mike. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks a lot, William.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Stay there.
bye-bye.
Stay there. Okay.